For 3 decades, Sydney Brooke Simpson lived behind silence. The daughter of O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson had seen the world twist her family's tragedy into headlines, jokes, and courtroom drama. But while the public obsessed over the trial of the century, Sydney was living with the one thing no verdict could erase.
Sydney Brooke Simpson has never given a public interview about her father's death, never released a written statement about disowning him, and there is no verified record of her describing what she witnessed the night her mother was killed. Claims like these circulate widely online, but they are not supported by any court filing, news report, or on-record statement. This script sticks to what has actually been documented: her real biography, her decades of choosing privacy, and the small handful of things she has said or done publicly. Where the record is silent, this script says so because that silence is itself part of her story. Sydney Brooke Simpson was born on October 17, 1985, in Los Angeles, the first child of O.J. Simpson, the former NFL running back and broadcaster, and Nicole Brown Simpson, who worked as a waitress when the two first met. 2 years later, in 1988, her brother Justin Ryan Simpson was born. O.J. and Nicole's marriage lasted 7 years and ended in divorce in 1992, 2 years before Nicole's death. For the first years of her life, Sydney existed the way most children of famous parents do, present in the background of a well-known family, but not yet a public figure in her own right. That changed on June 12, 1994. Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were found stabbed to death outside Nicole's condominium in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Sydney was 8 years old. She and her younger brother Justin, then 5, were staying with their mother that night and were among the first people found at the scene when police arrived. What exactly the children saw, heard, or understood that night has never been publicly detailed by Sydney herself, in an interview, a legal filing, or any other on-the-record source. Any specific account of her memories from that night, sounds, images, or descriptions of a figure at the scene, that circulates online is not something she has ever confirmed, and should be treated as unverified. What followed was one of the most heavily covered criminal cases in American history. O.J. Simpson was charged with the murders of his ex-wife and Ron Goldman. The investigation, the infamous low-speed pursuit of the white Ford Bronco on June 17, 1994, and the trial that began in January 1995 turned into a national spectacle, watched and debated across the country for more than a year. Sydney and Justin were not part of that spectacle by choice. They were children whose mother had just been murdered and whose father was on trial for it, and the adults around them, principally Nicole's parents, Juditha and Louis Brown, made a deliberate decision to keep them away from cameras, courtrooms, and reporters as much as possible. On October 3, 1995, a jury found O.J. Simpson not guilty on both counts of murder. The verdict was watched live by an estimated 100 million people and remains one of the most watched moments in American television history. Public reaction to the acquittal split sharply, often along racial lines, a divide that has been studied and written about for 3 decades since. For Sydney, not yet 10 years old, the verdict meant her father was legally a free man while her mother remained gone, a contradiction that had nothing to do with legal argument and everything to do with the ordinary, unresolvable grief of a child who had lost a parent. After the trial, custody of Sydney and Justin went to Nicole's parents. The Browns raised both children largely outside of Los Angeles, prioritizing distance from the media environment that had defined the previous 2 years. This is one of the more consistently documented parts of Sydney's early life, her grandparents' effort to give her something resembling an ordinary childhood, even though there was very little about her family's situation that was ordinary. She attended Gulliver Academy, a private school in Florida, completing her secondary education away from Los Angeles and largely out of the public eye. Reporting on her school years describes a young woman who was reserved and guarded about her identity, which tracks with everything her family did during that period to protect her privacy, though specific details of her emotional state, therapy records, or school disciplinary notes that sometimes appear in unofficial retellings are not part of the verified public record and should not be treated as documented fact. Sydney went on to Boston University, where she studied sociology and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in May 2010. Her time at BU is one of the few stretches of her adult life where even modest detail exists in reporting. And even then, the detail is thin. She kept a low profile, stayed out of campus organizations that would have put her in the spotlight, and by all accounts continued the same instinct for privacy that had defined her adolescence. After graduating, she moved to Atlanta and took a job as an events coordinator at a restaurant called Canoe. At some point during this period, according to later reporting, she used the name Portia while working in the restaurant industry, a way of operating without her identity being immediately recognized. That arrangement reportedly held until 2014, when a journalist identified her and her brother, effectively ending that particular effort at anonymity. From there, Sydney and Justin relocated to St. Petersburg, Florida, where they built a real estate business together, eventually operating under the name Simpson LLC. Property records and local reporting describe her as someone who has bought, renovated, and managed properties in the St. Petersburg area for roughly a decade, running the business under her own legal name rather than any alias. In December 2020, she purchased a modest two-bedroom condominium in St. Petersburg for $135,000 in cash, a detail that made headlines mainly because of how unremarkable it was for someone whose last name still draws national attention. Reporting has also noted that she has largely stayed out of Los Angeles and away from the neighborhoods and settings tied to her family's past. Her personal life has been reported on only in fragments, and much of it comes from second-hand sources rather than Sydney herself. She was reportedly in a relationship with a man named Stuart Alexander Lee for several years after her graduation, into the early 2010s. In 2017, she was linked in local reporting to a real estate investor named Robert Blackman, though he publicly described their relationship as a friendship rather than a romance. Beyond these scattered mentions, Sydney has not discussed her relationships, marital status, or family life in any public forum. Widely repeated claims about a marriage in 2020 or the birth of a daughter in 2021 do not appear in verified reporting and should be treated with the same skepticism as the other unconfirmed details that tend to accumulate around her. O.J. Simpson spent 9 years in a Nevada prison after being convicted, separately from the murder case, on charges related to a 2007 armed robbery and kidnapping attempt in Las Vegas. He was released on parole in 2017. There is no public record of Sydney attending his parole hearing, commenting on his release, or making any public statement about their relationship in the years that followed. What limited information exists about contact between them in this period comes largely from tabloid sourcing rather than confirmed, on-record accounts, and specific claims about final meetings, gifts, or conversations between them have not been independently verified. O.J. Simpson's health became a matter of public record in early 2024. In February, reports surfaced that he was undergoing chemotherapy for prostate cancer, which Simpson himself addressed directly in a video posted to social media, dismissing rumors that he was in hospice care and saying his health was good. Weeks later, on April 10, 2024, he died at his home in Las Vegas at the age of 76. His family confirmed the death in a statement posted the following day, saying he had succumbed to his battle with cancer and was surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and asking for privacy. His longtime attorney, Malcolm Laverne, later confirmed to reporters that the cause was metastatic prostate cancer. The family statement referring to him being surrounded by his children and grandchildren is one of the only pieces of on-record information suggesting any of his children, potentially including Sydney, may have had some contact with him near the end of his life, but the statement did not name individuals, and no outlet has independently confirmed which of his children, if any, were present. Sydney herself made no public statement about her father's death. She did not post anything on social media, since she does not appear to maintain any public accounts, and she gave no interviews. Reporters who attempted to reach her for comment in the days and weeks following his death were unsuccessful, and no representative issued a statement on her behalf that has been documented in mainstream reporting. This is, in many ways, the most important fact about Sydney Simpson's response to her father's death. There isn't one, at least not one that exists in the public record. No signed disclaimer of inheritance has been verified through court filings. No handwritten note about morally wrong money has been documented by any credible outlet. No deathbed scene, no final visit, no closing line about choosing to keep her mother has been confirmed by anyone with direct knowledge who has gone on record. These details appear in various online retellings of her story, often dramatized for video narration, but they do not trace back to an actual document, court record, or named source. Repeating them as fact would mean inventing a version of a real, private woman's grief for the sake of a better story. What can be said, based on the actual record, is this. Sidney Simpson has spent more than 3 decades doing something remarkably consistent for someone whose family history is one of the most publicly dissected in American history. She has avoided interviews. She has avoided social media. She built an ordinary small business under her own name in a mid-sized Florida city, bought an unremarkable condo, and by all accounts lived quietly enough that reporters have had to work hard just to confirm basic facts like her address or her business dealings. She used a fake name to wait tables so she could work a normal job without her identity becoming the story. When a journalist found her anyway, she didn't respond by going public. She simply kept working. That pattern, repeated for 30 years, tells its own story, even without invented quotes or dramatized deathbed scenes. A woman who was 8 years old when her mother was murdered and who spent her childhood at the center of the most watched trial in American history chose, as an adult, to build the smallest, quietest possible life. She chose privacy over profit, even though a single interview about her father's death would likely have been worth a substantial sum of money to any major outlet. She chose to keep working a normal real estate business rather than trade on a story that the entire world already wanted to hear. In an era when personal tragedy is often turned into a public brand, Sidney Simpson has done close to the opposite for 3 decades running. It's worth dwelling for a moment on just how unusual that restraint has been, given the world she grew up in. The O.J. Simpson case did not fade quietly into history the way most true crime stories eventually do. It was revived repeatedly as pop culture. FX's The People v. O.J. Simpson in 2016 turned the trial into a prestige television event, winning multiple Emmy Awards and introducing the case to an entire generation too young to have lived through it the first time. ESPN's documentary O.J. Made in America ran more than 7.5 hours and won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. Podcasts, true crime YouTube channels, tabloid retrospectives, and anniversary specials have kept the case in circulation every June since 1994. Each of these projects needed participants, and many people connected to the case: attorneys, jurors, investigators, even some family members eventually agreed to be interviewed, consulted, or credited in some capacity. Sidney Simpson is not among them. Across 3 decades of renewed public interest, dramatizations, and anniversary journalism, there is no verified instance of her appearing as a source, a subject, or even a background consultant for any of it. That absence is conspicuous specifically because it has been so total. Her half-siblings, Arnell and Jason Simpson, have occasionally been mentioned or briefly quoted in coverage over the years. Sidney and Justin, by contrast, have functioned almost like ghosts in their own family's most famous story, present in every account of what happened, absent from every account of how it felt. Financial reporting on Sidney has been similarly thin and, in places, contradictory. Some outlets have cited a net worth in the low 5 figures. Others have described a real estate portfolio worth millions when totaling properties held through her business. Neither figure has been independently verified through public financial disclosures. And it's worth noting that privately held real estate businesses like Simpson LLC are not required to publish detailed financials the way public companies are. What is verifiable is narrower and less dramatic. Property records showing specific purchases, including the St. Petersburg condo bought for $135,000 in cash in December 2020, and business registration records tying Simpson LLC to both Sidney and Justin Simpson in Florida. Beyond that, most numbers attached to her name online should be read as estimates, not established fact. It's also worth addressing directly why so much unverified material about Sidney Simpson exists in the first place. She is, by any reasonable definition, one of the most famous private citizens in the country. Someone whose name's search volume spikes every time her father's case resurfaces in the news, but who has given almost nothing on the record to satisfy that curiosity. That gap between public interest and public information is exactly the kind of space where invented quotes, dramatized scenes, and fabricated legal documents tend to spread, especially in video content designed to hold attention. A story with a confrontation, a confession, and a tidy moral resolution performs better than a story about a woman who simply declined to participate. That doesn't make the invented version true. It makes it easier to watch. None of this means we know what she believes about her father, what she remembers from that night in 1994, or how she felt when she learned of his death. It's tempting, especially for anyone trying to tell her story, to fill those gaps with drama, a confrontation, a confession, a single sentence that resolves 30 years of unanswered questions. But the honest version of her story is less tidy than that. It's a story about a woman who was handed a national tragedy as an 8-year-old and who has spent every year since trying to take her privacy back, one quiet, undramatic decision at a time. That may not make for as clean a headline. It's also, as far as the record shows, the truth. There's a broader lesson in how Sidney Simpson's story tends to get told, one that goes beyond this particular family. Children of people at the center of major crimes rarely get to choose whether their lives become public material. The choice gets made for them, usually before they're old enough to understand what's happening, and it rarely gets undone. What they can choose, later, is how much more of themselves to hand over. Some choose to speak, to write books, sit for documentaries, or build platforms around